In the 1980s, they rebooted The Twilight Zone, and there was this one episode that scared the shit out of me. It was called Button Button, and it was written by the great Richard Matheson. You might have seen the film adaptation they did a few years back called The Box. Trust me, the television version is better. Track it down. The story goes like this. One evening, a young couple is visited by an old man carrying a strange little box. On top of the box is a glass bubble that can be lifted up. Under that glass bubble is a button, a single red button. The old man tells the young couple that if they push the button, two things will happen. First, they will receive $200,000. Second, someone will die. But not to worry, the person who dies will be someone they don't know. Then the old man leaves them to decide. Now at first the couple is like, hell no, we're not going to push that button. No way, we're not murderers. But they're strapped for cash. They might lose their apartment, and what's the harm? If they don't know the person who will die, how will it affect them? Well, like Eve in the garden, it was the woman that pushes the button. They get their $200,000, and then the old man returns for the box. Where are you taking it? The woman asks. The old man smiles and says, to someone you don't know. I was maybe 8 at the time I watched that episode, and I remember the cold lump I felt in my heart for a while after. Because, as a kid, I knew I'd push the button if the box had been given to me. My family could have used that money, and I wouldn't know the victim. But that was the first time I could sense the ripple effect such unkindness could create, because then my fate would be left in the hands of a stranger like me. I sensed for the first time the existential faith it takes to live in this world. Is there anyone who wouldn't press that button if your need was great enough? Given the right set of circumstances, could everyone be a killer? I'm James Renner, and this is The Philosophy of Crime. Humans, we kind of have to be reminded not to kill each other. It's the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill. It's there for the same reason there's a warning label on the iPod Shuffle that says, do not eat. We're stupid creatures and sometimes we forget super important stuff. In his book, Why We Snap, R. Douglas Fields talks about a study in which researchers observed the behavior of 1,024 separate mammal species to determine which sort of animal is more likely to kill members of its own species. Perhaps the killer whale or the pit bull, they figured. But what they found was that when mammals kill, they kill members of their own species only 0.3% of the time. That's 1/3 of 1% of the time. There is one exception, of course, one outlier. It's us. When killing, humans choose to kill members of their own species 2.3% of the time, 7 times higher than any other animal. Slaughter is the defining behavior of our species, says Fields. Read today's paper, read yesterday's, or read tomorrow's. The enormous industry of print and broadcast journalism serves predominantly to document our killing. Violence exists in the animal world, of course, but on a far different scale. Carnivores kill for food. We kill our family members, our children, our parents, our spouses, our brothers and sisters, our cousins and in-laws. We kill strangers. We kill people who are different from us in appearance, beliefs, race, and social status. We kill ourselves in suicide. We kill for advantage and for revenge. We kill for entertainment. The Roman Colosseum, drive-by shootings, bullfights, hunting and fishing, animal roadkill in an instantaneous reflex for sport. We kill friends, rivals, coworkers, and classmates. Children kill children in school and on the playground. End quote. But why? Why do we kill each other as often as we do? What makes us different from other mammals? The answer is consciousness, self-awareness. It must have something to do with that, right? That's what makes us unique from all the rest of the meat on this planet. But to understand how consciousness comes into play, we should talk a little bit about this concept of the other. That's other with a capital O. There was this German philosopher who lived at the turn of the 19th century, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was preoccupied with theories that pondered how we became self-aware and how we became conscious of the fact that we are conscious beings. How does this happen? Can you remember the moment you realized you were yourself? and not anybody else? Hegel believed that we become conscious of ourselves only by interacting with other conscious beings, that what we are really doing is noticing how we are different and how we are similar to other human beings. We are becoming separate and realizing that we are an individual, unique to anyone else in existence. I am me, and everyone else is an other, or the other with the capital O. Hegel's ideas get pretty far out. He believed that God created humans so that he could become fully self-aware of his own existence, that God needed other conscious beings to know what he really was and what he should be doing with the universe. Hegel viewed the fall of man in the Garden of Eden as a necessary stage of the evolution of the universe. We had to eat of the tree of knowledge to become self-aware, so that God could know who he is. There is danger inherent in this self-awareness, though, because as we come to realize that we are separate from everyone else, we also come to realize that nobody understands us the way we understand ourselves, because we are the other to them. Nobody else sees us the way we see ourselves, how good we are inside, and that makes us sad. It can make us fearful. It can make us angry. Jean-Paul Sartre was thinking about this when he wrote, "I am incapable of apprehending for myself the self which I am for the other, just as I am incapable of apprehending on the basis of the other as object which appears to me, what the other is for himself." In his play No Exit, Sartre makes his point much more clear. Hell, he says, is other people. Of course, when we realize we are separate from everyone else, that we are our own self, the natural thing to do is to compare who we are to who any other person is. Are we better than this person? Are we lesser than this person? To Hegel, we are always deciding if we are the master or the slave. Nature sees no difference between one member of a species or another. Nature is indifferent, but consciousness can be vengeful. We lost Eden when a human committed the first murder, or so the story goes. And we've been fighting with each other ever since because there are things we desire that others might try to take from us. And even though we agree that murder is bad, there are still times when society permits us to kill other humans. There are times when regular blue-collar, seemingly rational men and women are told to murder another human, and they do so without hesitation. My grandfather, Walt, was a truck driver, and he had these muscular arms like Popeye that he earned by lifting freight for 30 years. This was my father's father, and we lived with him for a couple years when I was a kid after my parents divorced. The man I remember was always kind. He read the Bible daily and sat beside his recliner in the living room. He volunteered time at the local juvenile detention center, reading the scripture to troubled kids and listening to their problems. But when he was in his 20s, he fought in the Second World War, and from what we've pieced together over the years, he likely killed many Japanese. All we know for sure is that when the war was over, they wouldn't let his unit return until they spent extra time at a reintegration center on Hawaii, where they sent the soldiers who were extra good at killing and needed to be taught how to live peacefully with other people again. In war, we give people permission to murder other people. All you need to do is sign up. The people they're killing are humans, but they're different than us. They're on the other team. They're made out to be the others. In World War II, we called them Krauts and Japs. In Iraq, we called them towelheads and camel jockeys. We made up words to reinforce this idea that they were different than us. During World War II, American newspapers published grotesque cartoon propaganda that depicted Japanese soldiers as bug-eyed creatures with buck teeth and little resemblance to actual humans. If we're going to ask young men to kill, it helps to first convince them that the thing they're killing isn't really human after all. My grandfather killed one more time after he returned from war. He was driving a truck one day when he got into an accident that wasn't his fault. A kid in the other vehicle died. That one death seemed to affect him more than anything he'd done in the Philippines. He never drove truck again, and he devoted the rest of his life to God and the grace he found through volunteer work. He was taught to hate the Japanese, but that kid he hit with his truck, that kid was one of us. It was very different for him. If we had to, I think many of us would probably kill another human in the fog of war. But some of us give ourselves permission to murder in other circumstances. For instance, an intruder breaks into your home when your children are sleeping upstairs. Would it be okay to commit murder then? Even the law says if it's self-defense, murder is justified. Some people believe it's murder to have an abortion. Here's an interesting thing I've noticed about the pro-life crowd, though. They're usually the ones who support capital punishment, too. So, murdering a fetus is wrong, but murdering a grown man or woman is okay. And why is it okay? Because that man murdered someone else. Speaking of the death penalty, who exactly takes responsibility for the murder of the man strapped to the lethal injection chair? Is it the prison employee who pushes the button that sends the chemicals into the convict's arm? Is it the warden? Is it the scientist who made the chemicals? Is it the congressman who passed the laws that made it legal? Is it all of us for voting those men into office? People are killed every day because of our inaction. Do we all have blood on our hands already? As you can probably tell, I'm about as liberal as they come, but I know I'm capable of murder. If someone ever seriously hurt one of my kids, I'd kill them. I wouldn't be able to help myself. A couple years ago, while I was researching the mysterious case of Maura Marie, a man from Massachusetts began taunting Maura's family on the anniversary of her disappearance. He uploaded bizarre videos on YouTube in which he laughed at the camera and then smiled and winked before the words "Happy Anniversary" appeared on screen. He used the name 112 Dirtbag, which was an allusion to something Maura's father had said early on. Her father said he believed that a local dirtbag had killed his daughter. After I posted the video on my blog devoted to Maura's mystery, 112 Dirtbag started to harass me. It escalated until one day I checked his YouTube feed and found that he had uploaded a video of my 5-year-old son. A bunch of still photographs of my child with creepy music playing in the background. At first I thought he'd taken the photos himself from the street outside our house, but then I realized these were pictures I had taken. He had downloaded them off my personal Facebook profile. If that man had come onto my property that night, when I was still filled with rage, I would have killed him, or at least tried. In the 80s, there was this guy, Gary Poche. He was separated from his wife and shared custody of his son. They lived in Louisiana, Baton Rouge. Gary's 11-year-old boy was taking karate lessons. Unfortunately, the karate instructor, 25-year-old Jeffrey Doucette, sexually abused the boy for over a year. Then one day, he kidnapped him and fled to a California motel. Who knows what Jeffrey's endgame was going to be, but he allowed the boy to call home to talk to his mother. Police traced them to the motel room and Doucette was arrested. As a father, Gary took it hard. On March 16, 1984, Doucette was extradited back to Louisiana and landed with a police escort at Ryan Field. As police led Doucette through the airport in handcuffs, on the way to the cruiser, they passed a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, standing at a bank of payphones. Only when the man turned did police notice it was Gary Poche. He fired one shot, point blank, into the right side of Doucette's head. It was all captured on tape by the local news crew, and you can still find it online. As soon as Doucette drops to the ground, Gary drops his gun. Police can be heard shouting, "Why, Gary, why?" But they knew why. So do we. So did the judge who sentenced him to community service. Gary never went to prison for that murder. Even though a good law-abiding person who never harmed a fly, in this crazy world, sometimes you can't avoid killing somebody. Maybe you're drafted into a war. Maybe you kill somebody by accident like my grandfather. Maybe you're overcome with vengeance. Or maybe you're tricked into it. In 2017, 2 young women were approached by men who claimed to be part of a Japanese television prank show. 28-year-old Don Huang was from Vietnam. 25-year-old Siti Aisha was from Indonesia. They just wanted to become reality TV stars. They traveled with the men to airports in Phnom Penh and Kuala Lumpur. Once in the airports, they were given handkerchiefs and told to rub them on strangers' faces. There were cameras somewhere, they were told, watching everything, and don't ask questions, it's a really funny show we're making, it'll look great. Go. And so they did this a number of times in a bunch of different airports, weirding people out. Each time they made $100 or so, not too shabby. Then on February 13th, 2017, Doan and Sidi did the old handkerchief prank again at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia. Only this time the man they pranked got immediately sick. He started vomiting and coughing up blood. He died on the way to the hospital. And when the women tried to find the prank show producers, they disappeared. Because there was no prank show, of course. The women had been used for this specific mission. The man they murdered was Kim JongNam, the older brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It was a well-planned assassination, murder by proxy. Pathologists found traces of VX, a nerve agent, in JongNam's system. It appears the women were each given a cloth or spray bottle with half of the VX chemical solution that, when combined on the hapless man's face, became deadly. As of this broadcast, both women are currently on trial for JongNam's murder. If they are found guilty, they face a mandatory death sentence. If you think something like this can't happen in America tomorrow, you've sadly forgotten about the Joe Schmo Show. The common thread to murder, at least the kind of murder that decent people sometimes get wrapped up in, is that the victim is a stranger. The enemy during war. The intruder. The death row inmate we only know from the news. The idiot who cuts us off in traffic while we were having a bad day. We have no empathy for them because we don't understand them. They are others with a capital O. Here's the really scary thing. We seem to have this instinct that kicks in when we have identified someone as an other, especially when we know we have power over them. We have this instinct to corrupt those who are weaker than us, to torture them. Remember Abu Ghraib? Perhaps there is a quiet sadist in all of us, just waiting for the opportunity to step forward. Consider an experiment conducted at Stanford University in 1971. Professor Philip Zimbardo wanted to study the psychological effects of perceived power that exist in social situations, the old master and slave dilemma. He settled on the relationship between prisoners and guards and built a mock jail on campus in the basement of the psych department. Zimbardo hired student volunteers and then divided them into groups of prisoners and guards. It went about as well as you might expect. The first thing the guards did was to strip away the identities of their prisoners, taking away their clothes and their names. They were only referred to by their inmate numbers. They were made into others. It didn't take long before the student guards became abusive, before the prisoners began to accept their new realities, becoming submissive and paranoid. One poor soul became convinced he really was a prisoner, and that he could never leave. Prisoner 819 had a full breakdown inside that mock prison. The psychologist monitoring the situation removed him from his cell and told him to rest in a room, and that they would bring him some food. But when they left, a guard lined up the remaining prisoners and made them chant, "Prisoner 819 is a bad prisoner. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess, Mr. Correctional Officer." When they returned, the psychologist found the prisoner in despair. They told him he could leave, but the prisoner told them he couldn't because he was a bad prisoner. Zimbardo stepped in then and said, "Listen, you are not 819. My name is Dr. Zimbardo. I am a psychologist, not a prison superintendent, and this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment, and those students are not prisoners, just like you." After he was given back his identity, the man came back to himself. It's creepy, isn't it? I mean, if we can be fooled into believing a different reality so easily, who's to say this is the real one? Might I turn the corner tomorrow and find myself with a very desperate Dr. Zimbardo trying to convince me to wake up? This method of stripping away the humanity from victims is the same method some serial killers use. Dennis Rader, better known as BTK, referred to his victims as projects or animals. Jeffrey Dahmer wanted to create a human devoid of identity, an automaton he could control for sexual relief. We fear the serial killer we don't know, but how do we get by in a world where prep school college kids can adapt a serial killer's mentality with a gentle nudge in that direction? It's probably time for a joke to lighten the mood. Did you hear the one about the time the Dalai Lama ordered a hot dog from a street vendor? He said, "Make me one with everything." The question I posed at the beginning of this episode was, does everyone have the capacity to commit murder? I came to realize that defining what murder means is difficult. Abortion, executions, war crimes. But yes, it seems that if circumstances and bad luck combine in just the right way, any of us might take someone's life, whether it's in defense of our own life or even an accident on the road. What seems to make murder easier and more prevalent is the ability we have to see strangers as others, our need to worry about who's in a position of dominance, which one is the master, which is the slave. But all of this is a very Western way of looking at the world, and maybe it's the reason we have so many more serial killers in America. Eastern religions, the Buddhists in particular, have another way of looking at a stranger. They believe the stranger is only an extension of what we are, like different fingers on a spiritual hand, separate yet part of the whole. Before Buddha was Buddha, he was just a guy. Siddhartha Gautama lived about 2,500 years ago in India. He was born a wealthy prince, son to King Suddhodana, some say, and he was kept from the horrors and the suffering of the world until he was older. When he was 29, Siddhartha left his palace for the first time to meet his subjects. In the outside world, he saw old men for the first time, and diseased men. He saw a corpse in the street. The suffering of others depressed him. He couldn't return to his cushy home. He left the palace and became a beggar in the streets, relying on others' kindness to survive. One day he sat under a fig tree to meditate on the meaning of life. He vowed never to leave until he understood. He stayed under that tree for 49 days, and then attained enlightenment. What he came to understand was 3 simple truths. 1, in this life, we're meant to suffer. 2, nothing is permanent. 3, we don't have independent souls. There is no true self at the bottom of who we are. Like the fingers on a single hand, we are all extensions of the same essence. We're all connected. We're all one. There is no master or slave. There's no such thing as the other. There is no spoon. We all have the capacity to commit murder, but it's the struggle against that animal instinct that gives us hope. As Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and attention. The Philosophy of Crime is a Fearful Symmetry production. This episode was produced and recorded by William Mankey. I'm James Renner. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find links to all of my books at jamesrenner.com. My latest, True Crime Addict, is about my investigation into the bizarre disappearance of Maura Marie. As well as producing and recording this episode, William Mankey also writes the music for the podcast. You can find the other things he makes at boxwoodpinball.com. I'm often asked if writing about crime makes me more fearful of the world. The opposite is true, actually. We hear about these terrible crimes only because they are so rare. And there's one simple thing that each of us can do to make abductions and kidnappings even more rare. We can spend a little time making friends with our neighbors. If everyone took the time to really get to know the people who live to the left of us and to the right of us, we'd be able to recognize who needs help in this world. Don't be afraid. Make more friends.